have audio. Hello everyone and welcome to another Friday evening stream here at Strange Loop Games. My name is Jens, working as lead game designer here, and today we'll go over a little bit more on culture, as it's still a little bit in depth towards the adjacent areas of influence, borders, impact, and kind of the gauged game implication it will have, and hoping that everyone will enjoy it. And if you have any questions, just popping them in chat and I'll answer them as we go through. And as you can see, I am once again unsupervised. We were gonna have Toby here, but unfortunately got a bit preoccupied and couldn't participate, so we'll see if we get him into a future stream with that Australian charm of his. So I think we can just go straight ahead and flip over to some gameplay footage here. Oh yeah, true. I have Dennis keeping tabs on the chat, helping out with some moderation there as well. I think if we just do that, and we can transition into some gameplay footage just straight off the bat. Flip over the time so we can see something. So we went over culture a bit, about how you acquire culture and how you kind of deal with it in terms of adding it as another type of property layer. We had some difficulties really showing it off correctly due to Claims didn't really want to change out property type, so that has been fixed on staging. So now we can add more cultural properties and kind of give this more of a go through. I think there's nothing really to it other than just kind of going at it. So from the world map here, I set up 2 towns and 2 different nations or countries. And they are, as you can see, quite substantially different in scale and size. And the reason for this is their cultural impact and the value they've acquired is completely different towards one another. Hence why you can see the big one is starting to eat, or kind of clash into and envelop the middle here. So we have Grand Otoria, which is the pink/white one, and then we have Concrete Land, which is the white one. And if we go into the towns, you can see that each of these have one of their own separate towns, and they are fairly similar in scale. And one of the reasons for that is that they're comprised solely by a singular claim, and this claim is then limited to being the soft cap to the materials of the room. So both of these are kind of equal in terms of their strength in culture. And that is a little bit about what will make sure that people have a good grasp on why it's important, how it's done, and also the kind of settings that you're really kind of in-depth to tweaking out the server settings to make sure that you get the size appropriation that you want to have, where towns can scale up to a certain width, and how culture kind of passes from a town to a country to a federation, and then moving through kind of the ecos. So if we have where we want to start here, go through the process straight from the left here. We have the small Otterville we formed here with a few other objects here as well that are properly working as well, that just kind of go over. The camera is still a little bit inaccurate. It still has some minor issues, which is this one here. So if you are on staging, we are aware that it's not working 100%, and hopefully we get a fix fairly shortly for this. if you have some images and they'll contribute to culture based on this. Here. So inside the picture frames, you have the rate picture that is allowing you to give reputation to a picture, and this will pass into by the reputation for the artist. So this is the person who uploaded the texture or who took the picture and generated the game object itself, as this is its own kind of thing and it retains its information. So this can be sold and kind of passed over to another town and so on and so forth. And we went over a little bit on the other stream for this. But here we have it actually working properly now. So this gives you a value of culture, and these values are something that we are looking into making sure that they fit towards the scale of making sure that it builds the correct size and it builds in terms of radius, so you have some good impact on your pictures. You don't need to have a whole bunch of them versus some craftable objects that contains culture value and kind of offset this to give sort of a competitiveness, but still allows people to have a good player impact. But they are hampered when you place them in your own settlement, which means you can't just have a group that belongs to the same town and then they just give each other a whole bunch of reputation and then it kind of scales up. But if you're contained within the same settlement hierarchy, you will get penalties for making pictures and adding reputations to these sort of in-house, if you will. And with the culture added here, this will work similar to a regular housing object. So as you can see here, we're getting 1.37 from this one, and then we're getting 2.04 from this one, and then we're getting 20 from the foundation. It's being soft capped because of the room material, and this kind of builds into, it's really, really critical for your towns and the foundations in particular, but also the adjacent structures of cultural types, where you really want to make sure that you keep upgrading the housing value by making sure that you replace the material the house is made out of, because they will soft cap. Going through tier 2, 3, 4, making sure you get that ashlar and composite or flat steel or, you know, whatever really fits the aesthetic of your town, if you have any kind of restrictions, so on. So that's just a quick summary of where culture kind of comes from. And this is summarized into this. We have a whole bunch of information in the tooltip description for the different settlement tiers. We have how much or how many actual plots are contained within its influence sphere. We have the total culture the settlement is comprised of, as well as the actual plots that are claimed. And then we have, of course, how many citizens it has, if it has, if the leader position in this town is held by someone, and of course its treasury, as all towns has their own treasury right now, and the influence sources for this settlement. So this is where it will list if you have multiple cultural properties on the deed, and that's go over here as well. I think we might do that on the next tier up, just because I have it set up already. As a question popped in here with, can you see the towns and countries on the map at the same time, so you can see which town belongs to which country? At the moment, they are just kind of merging in, because this is only showing you the actual influence of the town or its appropriate settlement tier. So in this case, we have towns selected, then this is the border and the influence range of this town. So any law that is created in here is only going to be affected inside this area. And this then scales to countries as well. So if I select countries, you'll see that it joins up with the other one, because this is belonging to that town, or this town is belonging to that country, which then extends its influence over that area. So you don't really, at the settlement levels, you don't really have a clear distinction as to what is a town and what is the country in regards to most aspects of this, as town laws are only affecting towns themselves, and country laws are affecting the whole country, regardless if you're a town or not. So, if there is sort of a big interest in terms of being able to discern what, or sort of what towns are comprising inside this, or see like a small border gap in here, something we might look at, but it is also kind of complicated because of the fact that this is basing influence and not really, there's no real other thing revolving kind of how to depict the borders, if you will, because in a country there is no town borders, if that makes sense. From the country's perspective, a country will be comprised of whatever is below it, regardless if it's a homestead or if it's a town or whatnot. It's just it'll just apply anything that is affecting it. And on the cultural acquisition, we have here. It is working. So here we have the Grand Autoria. And here we have some new information here where you are seeing that we are getting an influence source of the Otterville Foundation deed. So this is listing the source that is coming from the town, and I'm holding control now, and that's why it's kind of shifting in between these toggles. You have the foundation deed for the Otterville, which is adding influence and adding both culture and adding both influence to the nation. We've got the foundation deed itself for the country, and then we have a deed that I claimed just on top of it. And as you can see, you're only getting a little bit here because the foundations themselves are inherently fairly powerful, just to make sure that they're always generating a decent amount of radius to be able to kind of cover the initial homesteads and kind of allowing you to get started off the growing side of things. And over here, so something that we failed to do last time, but it is working now. Inside a claim, if I go into the actual deed of it, I can switch over from a residential. As you can see, it is no longer a cultural property. All the points it was giving got removed. If I switch this over to culture, it gives me a total of 1.5. And that is because I have a decorative anchor, which is giving 0 points at the moment. But if I do this, and I have some test objects that I've been playing around with. And then we just drop down a cube here that is behaving like a cultural object. So in this case, it is giving me 10 furnish value. And here I think it's slightly limited. Here you can see that the first deed is now giving us a whole lot more influence radius, and it grew outwards. And it also gave us a lot more culture. So if I don't really have a super clean way of doing this at the moment. I think maybe. So here you have inside the government tab, you can see the different structure and how they relate, and this is something that's being reworked at the moment. So this will look a bit differently, as well as the annexation and everything that we'll go over in a later stream. And here you can see the total tally of culture and different cultures for these things. So here you can actually go in and check the opposing nations that might be super close in border and how they relate to you and how many properties they have a culture on and how their overall influence is looking compared to yours. Just as a neat little way to kind of fetch it. And as you can see here, so why is this country humongous compared to this little one? Well, I swapped this out to do two things. One, it has a second floor. So cultural properties work pretty much the same way as housing, where you have cultural value that is capped to the material of the room. It is capped to the different types of furnishings that you have in the room in the very much same way. So if you have multiple rooms on the same property, you'll be able to vastly increase the cultural value of it, because each room only gives you a set amount before you're starting to get diminishing values. So you might have this amazing epic painting that gives you a ton of points, but it's only going to give you so many points, and you don't want to put in another epic painting because you're going to be exceeding the value so many. And if we give us another one here, so in this case here, we've got a test object that gives us 10 points, and we're already soft capped a little bit. So if we drop another one down here, and you can see if I just pick this up again, might be a bit difficult to see on the stream, but you can see on the minimap that we are growing the border when we are placing it. And this is not a centrally growth existence, so it's not constantly adding to the central point of the property. It is adding to, or to the town, it is adding to the central property of the place that, or the deed that you have the cultural building at. So if you would to build, actually we do that well. So we added a few more commands for admins to do this. So I believe it's slash add claim papers, claim stakes, slash add claim stakes. That's supposed to be. Really doesn't want to let me do this. Supposed to just add claim stakes. Really doesn't want to. Oh, don't even start Monsoon. Don't give Nemo something else. Yeah, it needs a settlement ID. It was originally doing the command was initially supposed to be just point on, because it is complaining. Why am I not getting? Oh, there we go. Oh yeah. It is, yeah, it needs decimal, and then it needs the settlement. So we need grand. Oh, what did I call it? Grand Lotoria. That's what I was. That's what I called it. There we go. As you can see, we also have an interesting little pop-ups that says, you know, this might break stuff. And that gives you claim stakes, and then we have one for claim papers that gets linked to the property. So this is mainly an admin only, use at your own risk kind of thing at the moment until we proved it a little bit. So now that I have a property claim that belongs to this deed, as you can see, I can only place it inside this border radius. I drop it down over here. Let's do an ashlar building just because we can here. Wants to let me not wanting to do that. It's fine. There we go. Now we're cooking. We place this little guy outside. I'll rename it just to make sure that we have a good idea on what we're doing. I'm gonna name this ice. And then we can right click this and find it in my list of deeds. Select that one. Or am I gonna be suffocating under the town issue? We're currently having a slight issue with deeds being placed in countries that aren't really belonging to... Oh boy, yeah, there's a mishap there. Some stuff isn't really working properly yet, as you can see, and this is why it's still not really available for a broader testing in terms of our public playtest. But we around here that you make sure that stuff doesn't explode completely. Who knows? This is belonging to Otheria. It might be... So one of the reasons why things are misbehaving a little bit is that I've been using commands to kind of override requirements and override settings and shifting around myself. That's probably why. Let's just do that. That. Yeah, see, I was still part of the other claim, which was incorrectly allowing me to do things I wasn't supposed to do, because using admin commands can give you a bit of unpredictable behavior, hence why always make sure when you're doing this that you're not doing it on a live server unless you're absolutely 100% sure that it won't break things. In terms of just general command use, just good to have in your kind of back in your head when you're doing things on a live server, which is why I leave most of the very destructive command usage to one of our GMs. They are a lot quicker on doing it at this point, because I kind of transitioned over to do more design things rather than direct gameplay elements. Just name it here. Then now we can claim properly. It's giving me a bit of an error message that it's not really 100% accurate, but that is fine. We got what we came for. We have a bit of a house. Yes. Here we go. Now we can add some walls, and we are adding a functionality to make sure that you can move these claim stakes, which I've seen a few concerns and crop ups about. Hey, you know, what if we place our foundation or we place our claim stake in a really bad spot after we building and realize that, ooh, this was a bad decision. I want to move it, but then when I try to move it, it wants us to just rip out all of our property as we're picking it up and we're destroying the object. So you will have a special keybind for moving it rather than picking it up, or instead of picking it up straight up. And that is something that we're also looking at expanding onto vehicles to kind of help out a bit in terms of, you drive your cart off a bridge or you drove your car off a cliff. So instead of you having to kind of dump down a bunch of stockpiles and kind of teleport stuff out of the vehicle onto the ground and then picking up the vehicle and then placing it down again and kind of refilling it. So we're looking at adding something for making sure that you can kind of move things rather than destroying them. So now we have a new property here with a little bit of circumvention and a bit of inconvenience. We can now switch over this to cultural property, and it says that I can't because at the moment there are residents on it. And this brings us to the question of a multi-room cultural building being a source of both housing value and cultural value. Yes and no. Yes, you can just, you know, switch in between. If you have an amazing house and you built a completely different structure somewhere else and you want to move your housing residential deed over there, but you still want to have a use for this old property that you might not, like, it could have a bunch of furniture, it could have some decent housing value, but you feel like you don't want to hassle with, you know, renting it out to other people or so on and so forth. You could switch it over to a cultural property, and as long as you are out of residency of it, and switch this to cultural, and then most furniture types will amplify the value of a cultural property. So if I add this here, it'll turn into a cultural room, and as you can see, the borders expanded quite significantly up here, or at least a good chunk. And as you can see here now, we have this here that added influence to it. And if we go into the tooltip of cultural value or a cultural property, you can see that we're still gaining from seating, decoration, and lighting, same as any other type of room. So culture is a room category, same as living room or bathroom and so on and so forth. So you can add a bunch of supplementary furniture to kind of amplify it. So if we do lumber bench, and then we do table, floor lamp, yeah, floor lamp, turbine, because they are modular, just place down. So we add in, as you can see here, we have cultural value of 10. Do this, and we add this in here. People are gonna hate me because this is a tiny room. Very nice. There we go. Thank you. And now you can see that it expanded quite significantly more because we added these additional furniture types. So now that we are seeing the value bumped up by the tables value, the bench value, up to seating support. So seating support, as seen before, allows you to upgrade the value of the room up to 50% of the total value of the category score. So in this case, I could add seating value up to 5, since that's 50% of 10. As well as lighting. Lighting is up to 30%. So this is capped out. If I added another lamp, it would just diminish the value as it feeds the 30% of the total value. And asked the question for would a kitchen item help? No, as you realized, all the kitchen type furniture are a room category type and not a support furniture, so those would be a kitchen room. Hence why they're not valid in a cultural property. So with that, as you can see now, we wholesomely expanded this and kind of grew in this area, and now do this. Now you can see that, oh boy, that was very, very shiningly pink. That was a little bit too aggressive. Maybe change this out. Wonder if I can do it without being a part of it. Don't think so. Yeah, pink trees confirmed. This is the new color shading. We were planning on just turning the world pink and then just, you know, rolling with it. See if anyone notices. But no, on a serious note though. So this is the influence range, and inside this you could place new properties, and you could add a cultural property over here, and you can keep expanding it, or you could beef up this house to have, you know, a bunch of different more rooms and quadruple the radius of this by just adding more value to it. It'll keep expanding, and that's kind of how you grow and influence land and kind of push out the borders. So how will this kind of impact gameplay on a real level? Well, the most obvious one is if you had a court, your population inside this border is going to be voting on it. And this means you have direct control and direct accessibility to make sure that, as farmers have been pointing out and been very concerned about in terms of property management and terraforming for farmland is usually one of the most expensive in terms of land ownership. It comes in like heavy industrial buildings can always be built in a fairly dense populated area in some way, shape, or form, but farmland does require specific biomes, specific areas, and owning large swaths of land to cover this and allowing them to kind of build these big farms is gonna be more of a governmental property ownership kind of relationship in between. You can still absolutely do things like adding a zoning desk, for instance, and adding a farming district, and then only allow, say, farmers to do things like only allow gatherers of a certain skill level to harvest this, or only allow gatherers in this town to do it, or even go so far as to say tax and or what's the opposite word of it? Help me out here. Total blank here. Paying people to seed, and so on, to give more of a governmental impact on the food supply. But this is also something that could be a case of you have a couple of people that are, you have a group that forms a small town and they just apply, all permissions in the town is only related to the people in the town, and creating these commune society and groups that anyone is able to do anything inside this territory, but they need to belong to the territory. Yeah, subsidized. Thank you very much. That was the word I was looking for. So you might see more of a subsidizing versus taxing of harvesting, planting, where the government bodies gets more involved in land management, which is part of the push for this. And we are trying to kind of move away from everyone has access to a whole heap load of land claims, as you do with skill scrolls, as well as kind of the notion of more people generate more claims and more available properties. But we also wanted to kind of move away from the reliant on technological progression for this in one way. You still have a threshold where you generate papers for a town, you generate papers for a country, and then when a country kind of upscales into federation dumps out papers equivalent to all the people in the levels below it. So once you reach a federation, it could dump out like 600, 1200 claim papers, depending on how many people you have in the towns and in the countries up to that stage, which then gives you a whole heap load of land to add more cultural properties to, or build giant farmlands and then renting them out to farmers or selling them to the farmers. So that's one approach I'm hoping that people will enjoy to kind of get their hands on. Regions. Can I have a house in one city and in another? It depends on the rules and regulations. So you could own property in one town at the moment. I believe we are kind of restricting it, so you could rent it in a separate town, but you can't own it in another town due to influence levels. Because right now influence for properties are based on your relationship to the town. So if a citizen is a member of this pink town here, any property they have would be subjugated to the influence of this town. Yeah, so there's not really a whole lot more on that at the moment. We are still work in progress, as hoping that thing at the top is still visible. And we are still, you know, kind of making sure that everything is working the way we want them to be working. And we're also happy to take suggestions or concerns where things might work out completely different from what we expect them to, as with all game development, where players do something completely crazy with what they get their hands on once we reach that stage. And we're just, you know, trying to eliminate as much as possible in terms of both bugs, but also inconveniences, and making sure that we reach a level of quality of life where we're happy with the added complexity versus the change in behavior, and just trying to make it as polished as possible. There was something else I wanted to kind of rough on note on the question for the properties with different cultural values against each other, to be able to capture another country's cultural properties and so on. We do have an annexation stream that is planned, which will cover that whole mechanic, because it is a bit in-depth, and it's also optional as a server setting, just to make sure that that's known as well. Can we get laws or treaties to not allow culture borders to cross certain tiles? That one is probably not... Well, I shouldn't say not possible, because at a certain level it is probably possible to do, but laws only apply inside the cultural border. So without the cultural border existing there, the law wouldn't apply. So basically any law doesn't know anything about anything outside of that range. Dropped on a building here, just... Can we extend it? That, make a fancy little building here on top. This is big enough. Do the small ones. Add. There we go. So one of the things we did with courts, as I think I've shown, we changed out, so you now have a small court and you have a large court, where the small court is basically the court object that has all the kind of superfluous objects cut away from it, which also has a change volume of laws and interactions. Yeah, here. I just wanted to make sure that it was on the same property as the foundation, which is what I'm gonna roughing this in here in this amazingly quality building that I'm sure half of you are super impressed with how horrendous it can look. Amazing in pitch blackness here. As I am a member of this country now, I have the option of being able to create laws. And in here, on the game effect, we've got the settlement of jurisdiction that you can choose. So in this tab is where you select what area of influence you are going to impact with this specific law. And the same thing goes for everything that's kind of civic related. So be it an amendment to the constitution, you're going to be pointing towards the constitution of a town or a country based on what you select the jurisdiction of the object to be. And this is only selectable by valid areas you can place it in. So if this small court is placed inside a town, go here, and as Dennis pointed out, I can just override it. So if we do this, let's add it inside here. If I have a jurisdiction to add, drop it. Dump this in here. Enable. Oh, apparently not. Rex. Nope, Dennis, I can't do it. It's broken. Oh, why is it not wanting me to select big enough? It's gonna be big enough. Freaking hell. There we go. Let's just dump it in here. There we go. So here you can see that this is inside a town, as we saw here. So this is the town radius. We're placing this inside a town, inside a country. Hence why I have access to both the town and the country. So if I select this one here, and I create civics changes or laws that relate to that jurisdiction, once these have passed, you can no longer change their jurisdiction for this object, and this court will only apply to that specific layer. So if I draft a law here and says, let's do a dig. Actually, since we were talking about farming, let's do harvest or hunt. So any species, any tool used, and then we just do, you know, we can do revoke citizenship. Like if you're hunting otters in Otterville, you can revoke citizenship of them. Always fun. So we do prevent and prevent. Notice that I'm not giving it any specific other conditions. And this is also so if it's not super clear on when you're creating civic interactions or laws and so on and so forth. Once you created the draft you're happy with, you add the new law to an election. It adds it in the as an election draft inside the election sidebar, which is this one here, and that is where you actually started. So once you've clicked this button, there is no going back unless the election either passes, fails, or is vetoed, assuming someone has permission to do that. So we do start the election and just flip through it with quick command. So now we're completely preventing all harvesting inside our country. And this sounds like an awesome idea. We're protecting all the species and everything. We're protecting all the turtles. So if I do a slash, then arrow. Oh, two eyes. Sorry, I have my microphone in the way a little bit, so I have a bit of a difficulty seeing the left side of the. There. So if I do this, it should pop me in the notifications, which they're hidden off the side, so it's not helping anyone. Do I have a Wolfie here? There you go. And as you can see here now, we have a law active inside this settlement. And if I go into another settlement, as you can see, a new settlement, new area, no laws applying. And same thing for if I'm outside the area completely, I'll hit the turkey, it'll take damage. If I can hit the turkey, his pathfind is just too awesome for me. And could pick him up and everything's working dandy. And then once moving back into this town or this country, it is all affected by the same law. And if I'm moving into the town, you can also see that it is not really working the way we want it to, as you can probably tell from the amazing description there with the item name. But yeah, the item name. I think it's I think it's in regards to new laws being activated in properties with both towns and settlements. But anyway, if I'm shooting things that's outside the borders, it won't proc the law. If I'm inside, it will proc the law. That is how influence is going to impact laws and the layers of depth in terms of what you can kind of do with things. Nope. We're stuck with the item name. I'm sorry. It doesn't want to go away anywhere. And now I'm breaking even more things, so I think I'm just gonna peculiar is the word I'd use. Jump out the main menu, see if that alleviates the problem, maybe. Or if I broke the client. I think we might be good. It didn't follow me out here at least. Do you have any other questions that people feel like, ooh? I think everyone is seemingly quite happy. Like I said in the beginning, if you have, you know, huge concerns about, oh, this is gonna break everything for me, just let us know and we'll see if we're actually breaking it, or if there's something that we kind of also want to include or change and adapt things to. Does seemingly want to let me come in here. So wondering about how two countries will compete with each other. Well, the general notion is countries should be sort of competing with each other in terms of acquiring property and land they want to reach, or expanding to the level they want to reach at. And that is kind of where citizen activity comes into. Yeah, client white screen of death. I think it's just it really doesn't like me today. Go. Now we're entering the world. So, as Zach was saying here, concern being that someone will just be able to start a settlement next to someone else and conquer it all in one night. Well, first off, I would kind of clarify that by default, unless servers do something in terms of changing out the default election processes, which is what's being used for the spawn of settlements. So when you first create a town, you'll always have that default election type from the capital that you're used to. So anytime you want to start a new town, it's always going to be a 24-hour pass from the fact that you place the foundation to that you can found it. It always needs to go through that approval process. With the exception of, like, everyone is all agreeing, you can kind of push towns fairly quickly. But at that time, you're also going to be looking at, you need to have enough culture to to expand to that degree. And some of it is going to be locked in terms of tech. Some of it is going to be locked in terms of just time required to build up the resources to do that. As you are aware that these needs to be housed. They also have restrictions, and it is really not letting me do that. Did not like that. Where were I? Yeah, so you're always gonna have that kind of gap in where you can't just join a server and pop down a foundation and create a town off the go without setting up a manufacturing on your own and setting up kind of... Did I break the server there? Go away. Still on. It just doesn't really want to connect. And I think that... Oh, really? We wanna... When I terminate the server, then it starts to load. Okay. That's one. But I believe I'm screen sharing everything. Yeah, so... on the culture and salvaging the situation here a little bit with culture and its kind of effects and how this is handled in terms of limitations and kind of on the topic of how culture grows and how it can kind of poke out. You've got this input half-life versus output limit. So anytime a cultural value of a settlement tier reaches this point, it'll go to 50% towards the next level of the limitations. So as you reach higher scale and higher values of culture range, you are gonna hit a cap. So that town border won't expand indefinitely as long as you keep chugging in more culture. And the same thing, so once you kind of reach that level, you have to transition over to a country. A country consists of multiple towns. It requires a certain amount of minimum settlements, or a minimum amount of settlements, and a minimum amount of citizens inside those settlements. So you do have a kind of safety net in regards to the concern of being kind of steamrolled by a single cohesive group of players, for instance, which I'm guessing is part of that concern. And how do contracts work within this? Are they still the same? Well, contracts are kind of they're kind of their own little thing. If we're talking about the actual contracts and not the work parties, while the work parties are also kind of individual as well, where they're not really inhibited by the settlements, as these are... It really broke for me now. I think I might have broken the server somehow, so I think we'll... Oh, no. No? Are we getting in? We are getting in. Oh my, we are getting in. It's amazing. I didn't break it. Quite proud of myself considering how much I've been messing around with commands. There we go. We are back on the server. Apparently the mouse over on the settlements and the law active is cause for concern for some of it. Yeah, now that we have... Actually do that. Now that we have a law active in here and we have it tied to fiction, you can see that if I'm trying to switch it out, it can't change associated settlements while they're active or proposed laws in state. And yeah, as Dennis answered there, if there's a way to prevent, if there is a way for servers to prevent work parties across the globe when there is no global government. No, it's any kind of server that relies on a global predetermined settlement will need to adjust some of the variables for the Federation and use that as their kind of mock-up government to make sure that they have global coverage from the start. And if there's admins that do need help to kind of get their heads wrapped around how that works, when we get to that stage, just send me a DM or ask about it in either the update 10 channels or the server help once it's out on stable. Would I be able to make a work party with the criteria of you needing to be a citizen of X? Yes, absolutely. So work parties, they all still have the same law game values, and you can still get some of those from let's actually see if that works. Campfire, we have something. Right. Bye. Corn. Have a bunch of corn, and we link that up. Make that. Then we do here. So inside work parties, and we've got that shard corn. General requirements. Here you can check for is citizen of settlement, and you can just select countries or settlement or whichever specific one you need. And if the citizen is a member of that settlement, it is all right to kind of do this. So this is something that you could add as a general requirement to do your work party. Say your work party is only applicable for your town's citizens. You could do that, and then anyone that is not a member of your town is not going to be able to do it. So that's one way to kind of discern if you want only townies to be able to apply for your work parties. Do you have any other questions here in the line? I think we're pretty much cleared out. Can you have a federation without countries? Yes, if you change out the values for it. So as a is that a setting? Yes, sort of. Right now, it's still not exposed as a config, but it is inside the settlement definitions. As you can see, maybe that a little bit. Even the tooltip is not really thoroughly expanded. So inside mods, inside the server mods folder and core systems, you're looking at settlements definitions, and in here you have these values for the arrays, and this is looking like a lot of jungle. As Dennis points out, you can force enable a federation to just override all values and settings and configuration requirements. But you can do things like minimum cities to maintain the settlement, minimum cities to found the settlement, and these are in 3 increments. So you're looking at how many citizens it is required to start a town, how many citizens it is required to be in a total value across all of those towns or just under the country itself to form that, and then the amount of citizens you need to actually form a country. And same thing for the amount of settlements as well. So this is specifying that this needs two towns to found a country, and it requires 2 countries to found a federation. And then you've got the maximum ranges that you can be from the center point with your homesteads when you start these different tiers. So someone on their own could create a federation foundation. He could place it down, but he wouldn't be able to start a federation until he has enough countries inside it. So he could, a solo person could place it down, build a nice little house, and then invite nearby countries to join his federation and start it from there. Versus someone that is holding a country that is automatically added to the federation. I'm hoping that for server admins, yeah, there's a couple of variable names here that are quite long, but we're also trying to keep them as descriptive as you can get them, so there's no confusion as to what they're actually representing. Because when you're variables, when you're looking at them from a perspective of, say, a notepad or something, you kind of need to know what these are related to, because adding comments for all of these gets very cluttered in code when you're trying to actually see them from a modding or a server admin perspective, rather than just being able to look up inside an IDE, kind of just like backtracking code. Yeah. I feel that we're probably coming up to the close of this. We're up on an hour desk here. I'm quite happy if there's no other. As I was saying, if there's no other question, we can probably wrap this up. But got Alpen came up here with: could we also mod an extremely high cultural item to make the Federation cover the world, so normal federations can still occur naturally to carve out their own areas? I think Dennis answered it somewhat, but it is, as he did answer, with like you can only have one federation at any given point of influence. It's a relation to when you found a federation, it'll have a set influence radius. So, for example, I can't place a town inside a town. I can't place a country inside the influence radius of a country, because it wouldn't be able to be founded. Same thing for federations. I can't place a federation if it's inside the radius of another federation. However, if you don't have a global, if you haven't changed out, so you have a global federation from the start by like admin imposed global encompassing of the world, you could have multiple federations, assuming that first federation hasn't just gobbled all of the settlements, as any settlement that joins it will kind of bunch up and build outwards. So if I do here as a finishing thing, if we add this thing here, leave it set to all. No, good. So this is what he's talking about when you're force enabling it. It's just completely ignoring all of the requirements for, say, a room, tier value, how many countries you need, how many settlements or how many citizens you need, and then the total amount of culture required. So with force enabled running, you can admin assign, but you can't place like an admin federation on top of player federations. So you're gonna need to do one or the other. I do this here. start ratification. And that just popped because I'm force enabling it. Then we do this, and then we go United. The deal and worker blue and found. Woohoo! And now you see the default, because I'm overriding it and it doesn't have a room, it's not subjected to the restrictions of housing value, which is why it's giving its full maximum potential value straight out of the gate. And as you can see here, it's cut out because none of these towns are a part of this federation. And if I go in here and I add these to the force enable administrator mode, so I just grab these, make sure that all of them are part of me. Only need the countries. There we go. And now you can see that all of these are kind of gobbled up and are subjected to the federation rate. And inside here, there's still a couple of wonkiness things here with... If I add these in. There's still a couple of hiccups where it's not properly sending. Yeah, I stole the towns out of the countries, so the countries no longer have towns in them, which is why this radius here is no longer a part of this country, and this is no longer part of this country. And this is what I'm referring to when I'm saying be careful with commands or kind of shortcuts from that we use for QA as well as game master shenanigans for the public servers, because this can be very detrimental and very destructive for your save game. But as you can see here now, the Federation is having all of these areas that they are subjugated, and the radius, the default radius, is something that I'm tinkering with to kind of give us an appropriate scale. And it's also not properly inheriting culture. As you can see here, it's only getting 30 culture. This is supposed to get the culture of all the sub-settlements, so this should be more in the 200 range, so probably twice the size. But yeah, I think information overflow, there's a lot to take in. It's a very complicated subject, and yeah, I think that's probably what we have time for tonight. And I think we are... Do we have any last questions here? No. Is there any plan to have influence be impacted by terrain? So higher pathfinding costs for influencer on oceans or over mountains, and so on. It's an interesting idea, I think, but it also, because of how the core systems are working in terms of layer, and like it's basically generating it on a flat 2D map, there could be some interesting implications where our settlements would be able to kind of push up against the mountain. It definitely deserves some thinking too, but for 10.0, I don't think that that'll be something that we want to change at the moment, at least. But it is definitely a good idea. As for when the update will be released, that'll be something that Dennis announces when it's stable enough to actually be released. I think it's a good ending note. And with that, I am going to thank everyone for watching and having the patience to sit a ton of Civic information, and I know everyone is super hyped for some more interesting gameplay footage and some gameplay action that is happening, but we do have a couple more Civic streams coming up, and we also have an Avatar one with some cool changes and some updates on that progress is going, and that'll be announced when they're upcoming. And yeah, that will be all for me tonight. I thank you once again for watching, and I will see you next week perhaps.